Good morning and welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. It is Tuesday, July 25th at 10 a.m. and we are here today for a hearing in docket number 2023-15-E. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. I recognize our staff counsel, Sandra Moser, to read the docket.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, commissioners and parties. We are here today for the proceeding in docket number 2023-15-E, which is Dominion Energy South Carolina's 2023 avoided cost proceeding pursuant to South Carolina Code Annotated Section 58-41-20A. The proceeding has been scheduled for today, July 25th, 2023 at 10 a.m. And I believe all parties participating in this matter are available and the docket is in order. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moser. Let's take appearances from the parties. Who's representing Dominion Energy South Carolina?
Good morning, Chair Belser and members of the commission. My name is Chad Burgess. I'm in-house corporate counsel for Dominion Energy South Carolina, and with me today is Michael Anselmo and Sarah Nielsen, both of the law firm of McGuire Woods. They serve as the company's outside counsel. It's a pleasure to appear before you today, and we appreciate the opportunity to present the company's case.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
Good morning, Chair Belser. This is Kate Mixon on behalf of SACE and CCL, and with me today is Emma Clancy.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon. Carolina Clean Energy Business Association. I have a request from them that we'll deal with in just a moment. And Office of Regulatory Staff.
Good morning, Chair Belser and Commissioners Chad Torrey and Chris Huber on behalf of ORS.
Thank you, Mr. Torrey. We'll now proceed to preliminary matters, and I believe that all parties yesterday were copied on an email from Mr. Richard Witt, who is counsel for SCCBA, and he asked that as SCCBA is not sponsoring a witness, asked to be excused from participation in today's hearing, and I am on the record granting that motion that he be excused. And it's my understanding from the that came into our clerk's office. It was not sent to me. Let's be clear about that. And I did note that all parties were copied on that communication. So, any other preliminary matters? Mr. Torrey?
Madam Chair, late yesterday afternoon, actually maybe closer to earlier afternoon, ORS filed a stipulation in this docket. The stipulation is between ORS and the company. The terms of the stipulation would resolve all issues that the commission has before it in this proceeding. I am happy to give the commission a high-level overview of the stipulation if that be the desire. ORS and the company also have all of their witnesses here ready to go. So if the commission would prefer to receive information about the stipulation that way, that would be obviously fine as well.
I think that we are going to hear from the witnesses, but if you'd like to proceed with a high-level overview of the stipulation, that would be fine.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And welcomed.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Again, my name is Chad Torrey, Staff Counsel for ORS. There is a stipulation that has been filed in this docket for your review and consideration. The terms of the stipulation would resolve all of the issues that the Commission is required to determine every 24 months pursuant to South Carolina Code Ann 584120. Madam Chair, ORS proposes to mark the stipulation for identification and move it into the record as the first hearing exhibit.
Stipulation will be marked as hearing exhibit number 1 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, just a brief overview of the terms of the stipulation. All of the parties' witnesses are available, and for any testimony and questions that the commission may have. As with any settlement, there are certain aspects of the stipulation with which ORS and the company are in full agreement, and there are certain aspects of the stipulation that reflect the parties' agreement to disagree. First, the full agreement parts. ORS and the company have agreed that the company's proposed standard offered contract, form purchase power agreement, and notice of commitment to sell forms are reasonable. ORS and the company agree that the difference in revenue requirements, or DRR methodology, is a reasonable method to calculate the company's avoided energy cost. ORS and the company disagree on the data inputs that should be utilized in applying the DRR method. ORS believes that the company's marginal energy pricing should be utilized. The company does not agree that the use of marginal energy pricing is appropriate. The stipulation provides that prior to filing its next avoided cost application, the company agrees to work with ORS to study the differences between the inputs that the company uses to develop its avoided energy cost and the marginal energy pricing inputs that ORS proposed in this matter. The stipulation further provides that the company agrees to work with ORS to improve alignment of the company's time of production periods with the hours having the highest and lowest marginal cost of energy. Finally, ORS agrees with the company's proposed avoided energy and avoided capacity rates. ORS also agrees with the company's proposed variable integration charge, or VIC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Torrey. Mr. Burgess, is Dominion in agreement with the summary that was presented?
Yes, Chair Belzer, we are in agreement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Torrey. Anything further?
That's all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anything further as preliminary matters before we begin? Hearing none, Mr. Burgess, you're recognized, or Mr. Anselmo, to present your case.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Commissioners, the company calls a panel of Eric Bell, Jim Neely, and Peter David to the stand, please.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bell, I'll start with you. If you could please state your full name for the record.
Eric H. Bell.
And by whom are you employed, and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Dominion Energy Services as a manager of electric operations for Dominion Energy, South Carolina.
Thanks. And did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 33 pages of direct testimony pre-filed on May 1st, 2023?
Yes, I did.
Did your direct testimony include any exhibits?
No, it did not.
And if I asked you all the questions contained in your pre-filed direct testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, I move the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Bell be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Bell's pre-filed direct testimony will be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. And Mr. Bell, have you prepared a summary of your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Thanks. Could you please present it to the commission?
Good morning, Chair Belzer and commissioners. My testimony first explains how this avoided cost proceeding relates to the Public Utilities Regulatory Policies Act of 1978, PURPA, and the South Carolina Act number 62 of 2019. This avoided cost proceeding establishes the rates, forms, and contracts available to qualifying facilities, or QFs. PURPA requires that utilities purchase energy and capacity generated by QFs, which is why the purchase obligation is often described as a must-take obligation. Utilities, however, are not required to purchase energy and capacity at any price. Rather, avoided cost rates cannot exceed the utility's incremental costs for purchasing alternative electric energy, the utility's avoided cost. Avoided cost rates are meant to be the upper limit for the price utilities will purchase energy and capacity from QFs. The avoided cost rates must also be just and reasonable to customers to ensure they do not subsidize QFs. For QFs of 2 megawatts or above, the company calculates project-specific avoided costs and contract length terms for inclusion in the parties' form PPA. For QFs under 2 megawatts, the company has proposed avoided cost energy rates in its rate PR1 and rate PR standard offer schedules for approval in this proceeding. The Commission has approved a minimum 10-year term for the form PPA and standard offer contracts. My testimony next details the company's operational experience with solar facilities. Because of PURPA's must-take obligation, the company has little ability to shape or design its purchases to address a particular need of its customers or reliability requirements. QF developers, however, can primarily focus on meeting their financial goals without worrying about how energy sales can impact the purchasing utility system. PURPA and Act 62 have increased the amount of intermittent solar on the company's system. As of April 27, 2023, approximately 148.3 megawatts in customer scale generation and 1,046.4 megawatts in utility scale solar was interconnected to the company's system. Recently, the company has entered PPAs that include battery and energy storage systems. A 66 megawatt battery designed to operate for 3 hours and a 15.5 megawatt battery designed to operate for 4 hours. The company must plan for the intermittency of these solar resources. To try to mitigate this issue, both the solar generation owners and the company forecast the expected amount of solar generation and consider the anticipated weather conditions. Because weather forecasts are not precise, the company must be ready for the unexpected loss of solar generation well ahead of the actual weather contingency. My testimony provides examples showing the impact of the intermittent nature of solar generation on the company's system. Simply put, spikes and drops in solar generation cause cycling and ramping in other company-owned generation units. This cycling and ramping create thermal and physical stresses that the units were not designed to address and leads to the need for additional maintenance of those baseload generators. Operational issues also exist through integrating more solar on its system. At a high level, solar generator operating issues present a broad range of operating challenges regardless of whether the generator is baseload generation, peaking generation, or intermittent generation. Curtailments are also on the rise. The number of curtailments through the first quarter of 2023 have already exceeded the total curtailments for all of 2022. Solar likewise impacts the company's economic dispatch model. PURPA's obligations require the company to plan and dispatch units, even lower cost units, around its PURPA obligations and not necessarily in order of economic merit as the system load increases and is removed as the load decreases. Thus, the company often reduces the output of its lowest cost generating assets during low load hours. Sometimes this causes the shutdown of low-cost flexible generation, which creates higher operational costs for the company. The company's purple obligations also impact the company's need for reserves. The company must maintain additional operating reserves to ensure that it's prepared for large, unplanned drops in solar generation to continue its overall ability to reliably serve customers and balance the system. Maintaining these reserves necessarily results in additional costs. To prevent the company's customers from being responsible for those additional costs, the solar generators are responsible for paying those additional costs through variable integration charges. The company engaged Guidehouse to quantify the operational costs of maintaining sufficient reserves to offset the intermittency of additional solar on the system. The Guidehouse study presented by company witness David evaluated the operational and financial impact of adding 400 megawatts to the company's existing solar portfolio. Guidehouse calculated the levelized cost of maintaining the additional operating reserves necessary to integrate those megawatts, which it determined to be $2.79 per megawatt hour. It's important to recognize that additional solar capacity carries with it a higher integration cost. The company confirmed Guidehouse reasonably reflected the actual operating characteristics of DES's system in its Power System Optimizer PSO production model. This analysis considered several inputs that have been updated since the last proceeding, including additional QF solar contracts and fuel and load forecasts. The VIC calculated by Guidehouse validated and quantified this progression toward higher cost. This proposed VIC represents the expected cost of integrating the next tranche of QF solar PPA above existing contracts. It is not equivalent to the current VIC, $1.80, which was calculated for contracts that were existing at the time of the previous docket. The company requests to apply the updated VIC of $2.79 per megawatt hour to future PURPA-based QF solar PPAs. The updated VIC should remain in place for the entire term of the PPA. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Neely, could you please state your full name for the record?
James W. Neely.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Dominion Energy Services as an energy market strategic advisor for Dominion Energy South Carolina.
And did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 16 pages of direct testimony pre-filed on May 1st?
Yes, I did.
And did your pre-filed direct testimony include any exhibits?
No, it did not.
If I asked you all the questions contained in your pre-filed direct testimony here today, would your answers remain the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, I move the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Neely be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Neely's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Neely, have you prepared a summary of your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Could you please present it to the commission?
Yes. Good morning, Chair Belzer and members of the commission. The company used the commission-approved difference in revenue requirements methodology to calculate both the energy and capacity components of its avoided cost. The full explanation of the methodology is set forth in my testimony. The resulting avoided energy costs and avoided capacity costs are used in the company's Rate PR1 and Rate PR standard offer. The long-run avoided costs for QFs that have production capacity up to 2 megawatts are set forth in the Rate PR standard offer attached to company witness Farley's testimony as Exhibit JTF-5. The short-run avoided costs for QFs that have power production capacity less than or equal to 100 kilowatts are set forth in Rate Schedule PR1 attached to company witness Farley's testimony as Exhibit JTF-2. The avoided capacity costs and avoided capacity rate are the same for the standard offer and Rate PR1. The avoided capacity cost is $58.29 per kW year for all QFs that qualify for the standard offer rate. This avoided capacity rate will be paid during the months of December, January, and February for energy generated from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. The hourly value to be paid during this three-month period is $0.2159 per kilowatt hour. The avoided energy costs for the standard offer are set forth in Table 1 of my direct testimony. The avoided energy costs for the PR1 are set forth in Table 3 of my direct testimony. For systems above 2 megawatts, which by definition do not qualify for the standard offer or PR1 rates, the company proposes to continue calculating a project-specific avoided cost using the approved avoided cost methodology and are included in rate PR form PPA attached to company witness Farley's testimony as Exhibit JTF 6. Of note, the VIC has not been included in the company's avoided cost calculations or the rates calculated to QFs. Therefore, the VIC will be included in the QF rates as a separate item. In sum, the company respectfully requests that the Commission approve the company's calculation of the proposed standard offer avoided cost and PR1 avoided cost, and the company's continued use of the avoided cost DRR methodology for future updates to the standard offer and for calculation of the avoided cost for small power producers which do not qualify for the standard offer rate. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you. And Mr. Neely, did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 16 pages of rebuttal testimony pre-filed on June 28th, 2023?
Yes, I did.
Did your pre-filed rebuttal testimony include any exhibits?
No, it does not.
And if I asked you all the questions contained in your pre-filed rebuttal testimony today, would your answers remain the same?
Yes, it would.
Chair Belzer, I move the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. Neely be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Neely's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. And Mr. Neely, have you prepared a summary of that pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I did.
Could you please present it to the Commission?
Yes. My rebuttal testimony addresses ORS's witness Ming's recommendations regarding the company's proposed avoided energy and avoided capacity cost. His recommendation that the current VIC remain unchanged, and witness Ming's recommendation that the company study two issues for potential future use in these proceedings. As an initial matter, witness Ming concedes that the company used the Commission-approved methodology to calculate the avoided energy and avoided capacity components of avoided cost. For the application of avoided energy cost, the company accumulates its calculated annual avoided cost into 11 time of production periods by using a profile created using the 10-year average hourly marginal cost. The marginal costs define the profile but are not avoided cost. The avoided capacity cost is the levelized net present value of the difference between the incremental capital investment in the base case plan and the incremental capital investment in the change case plan. Witness Ming recommends the company use the marginal cost generated by Plexos for its avoided energy cost. The hourly marginal prices relied upon were never meant to represent avoided cost. These prices exist to provide the basis of distributing the avoided cost values over the time periods. Therefore, the Commission should reject witness Ming's suggestion for several reasons. First, this approach would deviate from the approved Commission methodology and used by the company in its calculations. Second, the Plexos marginal costs are not the same as the company's avoided cost. The Plexos marginal costs are the cost to produce 1 more megawatt of energy above the load in each hour. That is different than avoided energy cost. Avoided energy costs are the costs that must be incurred by the company to meet some amount of load. Plexos marginal costs are not avoided costs because the utility does not need to generate or purchase energy above its load. Third, witness Ming's assertion that there should not be a difference between marginal cost and avoided cost is unsupported speculation and is not correct. Marginal cost is the cost of serving the next megawatt of capacity to be added in every hour, as opposed to the value of the last 100 megawatts of capacity. The difference in these values is appropriate and expected for the DESC system. Fourth, the recommendation does not comply with PURPA. If the avoided energy cost component calculation utilized the hourly system marginal cost, the company would pay QFs more than the actual avoided cost. PURPA does not allow a utility to pay more than the actual avoided cost. The approved methodology used by the company in this proceeding complies with PURPA. Witness Ming next recommends that the company realign its time of production periods for rate PR1 and the standard offer based on the company's hourly marginal cost values provided in this matter. The company should reject that position because time of production periods are designed to tell generators when production is most valuable. Frequent changes of these patterns based on minimal shifts in hourly marginal cost values could create confusion. The company suggests keeping the time of production periods the same until a material reason to alter those periods exists. Witness Ming's recommendations on the avoided capacity calculation should also be rejected. He first suggests that the company include a small value for capacity even in years when there's no capacity to be avoided. The Commission-approved calculation accurately assigns zero avoided capacity value in years when no new capacity is needed to meet the minimum reserve margin. Mothballing resources that customers are currently paying for in order to pay for capacity that is not needed is not appropriate. Witness Ming advances a position to use net capacity in the avoided capacity calculation. For the avoided capacity cost calculation, 100% of the cost of the turbines is appropriate and should not be reduced by any energy benefits. The avoided energy calculation captures the value of operating all generation in the resource plan. Witness Ming then states that the company evaluate a fixed capacity payment instead of the approved methodology. The company twice proposed a fixed capacity payment for solar. The Commission has prohibited the company from implementing a solar-only avoided energy and capacity rate that includes a fixed capacity payment based on an ELCC calculation, like what Witness Ming suggests. The current method used by the company appropriately ties payment for capacity with the utility avoiding the purchase of additional capacity. The Commission should reject the recommendation that the company should perform a study as to whether there is a significant correlation between solar generation and energy and capacity prices. The company does not have access to public organized capacity and energy markets with which to make this comparison. The result of Witness Ming's proposed study would be a solar-specific rate. The Commission has twice prohibited the company from implementing a solar-specific avoided energy and capacity rate in favor of rates that are applicable to all resources. Witness Ming's position on the VIC also lacked merit. He did not conduct a study to determine his recommendation to maintain the VIC at the current value. The Guidehouse study presents the only evidence in the record on this issue and supports an increase to the VIC. This concludes the summary of my rebuttal testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Neely. Mr. David, could you please state your name for the record?
Peter B. David.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Guidehouse as an associate director with the company's energy, sustainability, and infrastructure practice.
And did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 32 pages of direct testimony pre-filed on May 1st?
Yes, I did.
If I asked you all the questions contained in your pre-filed direct testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, I move the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. David be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. David's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. And Mr. David, did your pre-filed direct testimony include exhibits labeled as PBD1, PBD2, and PBD3?
Yes.
Do you have any changes to those exhibits?
No, I do not.
Chair Belzer, I move that the exhibits labeled PBD1, PBD2, and PBD3 be entered into the record as the next composite hearing exhibit. I believe that would be 2.
Mr. David's exhibits labeled PBD 1, 2, and 3 will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 2 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you. Mr. David, have you prepared a summary of your pre-filed direct?
Yes, I have.
Could you please present it to the Commission?
Good morning, Chair Belzer and members of the Commission. In March 2023, Guidehouse completed a study titled Variable Integration Cost on behalf of Dominion Energy South Carolina. I refer to the study as the VIC study. My testimony provides the background, key concepts, and definitions used in the VIC study, explains the methodologies used by Guidehouse in completing the study, and outlines the VIC study's findings and conclusions. To perform the VIC study, Guidehouse established a benchmark scenario for its Power System Optimizer, PSO, production cost model to ensure our model was properly calibrated to DESK's historical operations and near-term planning, conducted a solar uncertainty analysis based on real 2022 data from solar generators on the company system to determine solar forecast error for hourly generation from solar resources, developed a methodology for calculating the operating reserves required to integrate tranche 1176 to 1575 megawatts, and performed additional analyses as outlined in detail in my testimony. To evaluate the variable integration costs for new solar generation in DESK, Guidehouse modeled the company's system in PSO under two scenarios, one with and one without the increased minimum operating reserve requirement necessary to reliably integrate the solar capacity comprising tranche 1176 to 1575 megawatts, and then compared the total production cost to serve the company's load across both scenarios. Both scenarios included the 1,175 megawatts of existing interconnected solar generation, as well as tranche 1176 to 1575 megawatts, which represents the next 400 megawatts of solar to be installed. The VIC study found and concluded that solar generation is an intermittent resource, meaning there is a possibility for significant variance between expected generation and actual output. The potential for solar forecast error introduces generation uncertainty that increases as solar penetration increases. DESK must increase the amount of operating reserves available during solar generation hours to account for this uncertainty and ensure load and current operating reserve obligations are met. The increase in minimum operating reserve requirements will change how the company dispatches the system, with the end result being an overall increase in system operating costs. Increased system operating costs are heavily concentrated during the shoulder periods of the year, spring and fall. The incremental levelized variable integration cost of maintaining the additional operating reserves necessary to integrate tranche 1176 to 1575 megawatts is $2.79 per megawatt hour. Building additional resources such as quick start combustion turbines, battery energy storage systems, or combined cycles to provide the additional operating reserves required will not reduce costs to DESK. Other than solar installations, the forecast period capacity additions and retirements used in the study are consistent with DESK's 2023 IRP reference build plan, and it is possible for solar projects to be added to the system that can mitigate their own potential forecast error by installing co-located battery storage or changing operations to be more flexible by giving DESK operational control. Solar assets that meet these conditions will not require increasing operating reserve requirements and thus should not be subject to a variable integration charge. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you. Did you also prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 10 pages of rebuttal testimony pre-filed on June 28, 2023?
Yes, I did.
Did your pre-filed rebuttal testimony include any exhibits?
No, it did not.
And if I asked you the questions contained in your pre-filed rebuttal testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, I move the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. David be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. David's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. And Mr. David, have you prepared a summary of that pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I have.
Could you please present it to the commission?
My rebuttal testimony responds to certain issues raised by Mr. Zachary Ming in his direct testimony filed on behalf of the Office of Regulatory Staff and the corresponding portions of the direct testimony of Mr. O'Neill O. Morgan filed on behalf of the Office of Regulatory Staff. While witness Ming acknowledges that Guidehouse's VIC study methodology is both reasonable and improved from the 2021 study, he levies 4 criticisms of the study. I disagree with all 4 of witness Ming's criticisms. First, witness Ming claims the VIC study overestimates the minimum operating reserve requirement on high solar days. I disagree for 2 reasons. One, Guidehouse conducted a detailed drop study used to determine the minimum operating reserve requirement that used the 95th percentile of unexpected solar drops on an absolute megawatt basis, not a percent of drop basis. Therefore, any correlation between high expected solar generation and low generation uncertainty is reflected in the study. 2, witness Ming's premise that the company need not hold additional operating reserves to ensure reliability because the possibility that cloud cover could cause a sudden drop in generation is very low misrepresents the purpose of operating reserves. The company must hold operating reserves to account for unexpected drops, even if the chances of such drops are low, as the recent historical data used in the drop study shows that the chances are non-zero. I also disagree with witness Ming's claim that solar itself is best suited to provide operating reserves for integrating additional solar capacity. Even if solar were suitable for providing operating reserves, all existing utility-scale solar facilities that serve desk load are third-party owned and operated, and therefore cannot serve to provide operating reserves to desk. Witness Ming's third criticism relates to the fact that a large portion of the costs being covered by the VIC occur on a small number of days. As shown in the study, there are real operating reserve shortage issues that drive a high concentration of VIC costs to be incurred on a relatively small number of days in the forecast. But because DESC does not have the contractual right to curtail solar generation in order to use it to provide operating reserves, witness Ming's suggestion that the company mitigate costs during these periods to reduce the VIC by curtailing solar generation in order to use it to provide operating reserves is simply not feasible. And finally, I disagree with witness Ming's claim that the methodology was flawed because solar generation was not discounted with a net present value calculation. Net present value is a financial metric that incorporates a discount rate. Its purpose is to properly weight upfront costs and compare the rate of return for a project relative to the assumed discount rate. Applying the NPV to solar generation in the VIC calculation context would improperly weight the VIC towards the early years of the forecast. In the end, witness Ming recommends the Commission set the VIC at $1.80 for tranche 1176 to 1575 megawatts. Not only does this recommendation lack support in the record, it is not based on any study performed by a party to this proceeding. The additional costs that flow from this recommendation will be borne by DESC's customers rather than the solar developers creating those costs. This concludes the summary of my rebuttal testimony.
Thank you. Chair Belzer, Mr. Bell, Mr. Neely, and Mr. David are available from questions from the parties in the Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Anselmo. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. Any questions?
No questions.
Thank you. I'll call on the Office of Regulatory Staff just for the record, but I know the answer.
No questions, Madam
Thank
Chair.
you. Commissioners, questions for any of these witnesses? Well, I'll start if nobody else wants to jump in. Mr. Bell, you discussed in your summary and in your testimony curtailments in 2023 that have already exceeded the number of curtailments in 2022. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Describe to me what you mean by curtailments there.
Curtailment, we log a curtailment anytime we have to call a generator, in this case the Purple QF solar generator, to go offline or reduce their output because of operational issues.
Okay, and can you describe to me what kind of operational issues would lead to the company asking the solar developer to curtail?
Yes, ma'am. We call those minimum load events. When we're carrying a certain amount of generation through economic dispatch, but then we have to plan on maybe lower loads, and you can only turn down the generators to their minimum operating levels. And then so if you have a high amount of solar or more solar than you expected, and you need those generators that are online to be online for the next peak or the next morning, you would ask those solar generators to curtail for a certain period of time, possibly through the rest of the day.
And is it because that Dominion doesn't have dispatchability over the solar generators that you have to contact the generator to curtail?
That's the reason. Yeah, it's a phone call or a fax, and you contact the operator. So solar plants aren't normally dispatchable, so we don't have dispatch rights on them. And then in this case, they would just be producing. They would plan to produce however much energy they would be producing because of the available sunlight, and then we ask them in a certain order. I think it's the last contract signed is the one that's most likely to be curtailed. And so we figure out how many megawatts we need to be curtailed, and we call that many generators to have them come offline.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
I think it does. Thank you. And with regard to the updated VIC that Dominion is proposing, you've testified that $2.79 per megawatt hour, that would be over the life of the contract. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that would only apply to I think you said future PPA contracts. So that would be to any contract that would be signed after that rate is approved, provided the commission approves that rate.
That is correct.
Okay. Would not impact existing PURPA contracts.
It would not.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Well, I'm going to go to Mr. David. Mr. David, your Exhibit 2 is a VIC study that was, I believe, completed in March.
That is correct.
Right? And then your Exhibit 3 is an updated VIC study. Is that correct?
It is updated by way of a very small correction to a footnote.
Okay. I think I saw a couple of red lines in
Yeah.
there somewhere, but that's the only differences.
Correct. There were, I believe, one or two small footnotes that I realized needed to be updated, but the substance of the study is unchanged.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Mr. Neely, I'm not going to leave you out today. Sorry. Get to your testimony. Try to get to your testimony. Mr. Neely, in your rebuttal, when you are explaining why Dominion disagreed with ORS witness Ming, I am looking at page 16 of your rebuttal, if you want to join me there. And I believe you're talking about you're describing work papers that it sounds like Dominion produced to ORS in response probably to discovery would be my assertion or guess.
Well, we provide all of our work papers with our application.
Okay, so this is out of the application. And you indicate that there were worksheets labeled as LMP profiles and LMP profile hourly. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in the electric industry, and specifically with regard to probably solar generation, what is the abbreviation LMP commonly referred to?
Locational marginal price.
Okay. And as I read your testimony, you've indicated that LMP is not an appropriate value, shall I say, to use in these calculations. Is that correct?
Well,
I'll give you a
yes.
chance to explain in a second.
Okay.
Is that a correct
That's
statement?
correct.
Okay. If is that a value that Dominion, the LMP, the locational marginal price, is that a value that Dominion even calculates or keeps?
No.
Okay.
The term locational marginal price is not actually, we don't have locational marginal prices in our system. What we did calculate was the marginal price.
Okay.
And so it really was mislabeled LMP. It
Well,
should have
and
been just MP.
That's where I'm going. Why would Dominion label a worksheet with a value that y'all don't even use or really keep? And especially when it is an abbreviation that is customarily used in the industry.
I'm at fault. I didn't correct that when I saw it, and it did lead to some confusion. I agree.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I have. Commissioners? Commissioner Caston is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess this would be to you, Mr. Bell. If not, whomever answer.
All right.
Well, in your direct testimony, you mentioned, PURPA exempts QFs from certain state laws. Which ones? Can you give me specifics?
Commissioner Casson, I actually don't know that list.
Okay. Well, the last sentence on page 6 of your direct, rolling into 7, where you talk about details on what rates, financial, organization aspects you were talking about in the last sentence. Can you elaborate some on that? What you meant by that?
Sir, you said page 6?
Bottom of page 6, last sentence, kind of going into the next sentence.
No, sir, I really don't know exactly what those aspects are, and I would offer up witness Folsom on this issue.
I'll file that away. Thank you. And I guess this would kind of be whomever, probably betwixt you two. If I understand it correctly, the 1,046 megawatts, in other words, in 2017, I think I saw that there were 9 megawatts of solar. Is that correct?
There was 2 megawatts of solar.
2?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in April of this year, there was, as far as utility scale, 1,046 megawatts. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
And 146 residential or small.
Yes, sir. Customer scale.
Customer scale. So that's just under 1,200 or somewhere around there. Does any of that have any type storage, or is that all just straight variable solar, intermittent solar?
In that number, I believe that there's one plant in Eastover, South Carolina, that has storage in that number. And I don't actually know about the customer scale. They could have small storage, but I doubt it. I think there's just one plant in that number.
Do you know how much storage that is?
I think it's 15.5 megawatts of AC discharge capability, 4-hour discharge.
It's actually 18 megawatts.
Oh, it's 18.
18.
Thank you.
So still roughly 1,030, 1,020 something. So if I'm understanding this, because we've had various and sundry things I've seen or heard people talking about duck curves and such as that, and what I think I'm hearing you guys say, and what I think I understood in your testimony relative to the intermittency, is what is your largest generating plant? Would that be VC Summer? I mean, what's the largest generating plant?
It's VC Summer by total output, but by ownership, though, share, we only get 2/3 of VC Summer, so it would be Jasper Generating Station.
And how many megawatts is that?
Right about 900 megawatts. I don't know the exact number that we have on the books.
So what I'm trying to just understand from how things work point of view is if all of the solar system is working pretty well on a particular day, hour, and it's generating 1,000 megawatts, and you only need 1,200 or 2,000 or whatever. Do those type scenarios occur?
I think you're talking about, like, do we ever have so much solar we have to curtail? Is really where it sounds like it's going.
That
does happen. And one thing that chart doesn't show, where I show the progression on the number of curtailments per year, what it doesn't show is that a lot of those happen in the wintertime and the shoulder months when the loads are low. Now, the wintertime load isn't always low, but there's a lot of days it's very mild and the load is low. And so we're carrying units that we need for our next peak, so our next cold day. And so if we get a lot of solar on a clear winter day, but we don't have much load, temperatures in the 50s and 60s, we're likely to have that situation where we have too much solar. The summertime is exactly the opposite, right? You have a lot of solar that comes in during the day as it warms up and the air conditioning load goes together. So those two match up really well in the summertime, but that's not all year round, and that's why we call them non-dispatchable and must take. It doesn't matter what our customers are doing, we're going to get that solar just depending on how the sun shines.
So relative to, say, your base load, your base plant, the nuclear, the coal, or whatever it is, and if I'm assuming incorrectly, let me know, that the base load plants typically, when I look at the hierarchy of efficiency and least cost and that type thing, is the base unit would be at that bottom, and then you would work your way up as you had to kick in another generation source. Is that reasonably accurate or correct?
Historically, that's true that when the plants are designed, they're usually designed to be the most cost-effective fuel. And that's true in the grand scheme of things as you move from baseload nuclear up through peaking turbines. But it's not always that simple, because sometimes we have the coal price and gas price flip over, but we still account for that in our daily economic dispatch.
All righty. And Mr. Neely, this, I think, is more specific to you since you talked about it in your testimony. Do you believe a separate solar rate should be developed?
I do. We've actually proposed that the last two avoided cost hearings, and we think that that would align better with the the cost of having those generators on our system. But we didn't propose one this year because it was been rejected the last two avoided cost hearings, and so we assumed that that was something the commission wasn't interested in.
I guess I'll ask ORS this, but if I looked at the testimonies correctly, it seems like that is one of the things that you both have seemed to agree on, but I'll follow up on that. I have no more questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Just have a few questions. So, Mr. Neely, could you describe more about mothballing? When would it happen? What is it? So on and so forth.
Right. Mothballing is typically where you take a generator that's available to be dispatched, but you don't need it. So you turn it off and you don't plan to use it, and you frequently have to do continuing maintenance to keep it ready for some period in the future when you would actually bring it back online. A lot of the costs wouldn't go away. The variable costs would go away. There might be some possibility of getting rid of some of the fixed costs by reducing the staff, but that's really a dangerous thing. If you ever reduce your staff and you hope to put them back in, put the unit back online, you don't need all that staff again. So, yeah, it is something that people have done. Instead of retiring a unit, they put it in a mothball state with the idea that they could bring it back sometime in the future. But there are a lot of risks, especially with an old unit. It's like taking an old car, turning it off and putting it in the garage and expecting it to start back up in 5 years and start working again. That's a very risky thing to do.
And has Dominion done any of that, or?
No, we've not mothballed any of our units.
Okay. And for you, Mr. Bell, so if you do curtail solar, you still have to pay for it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And just a general question that's not necessarily related to what we're talking about here today, but I was just wondering, how did solar perform during Winter Storm Elliott? Can you all talk about that at all?
I recall that I don't recall the whole sequence during the storm, but I recall on Christmas Eve, rather, the 24th, that solar performed well.
Okay. And did the company have rolling blackouts or anything like that?
On the morning of the 24th, the company had a load shed for a brief period of time right before 8 o'clock in the morning.
And so when you say load shed, does that mean you curtail firm customers, residential, or what?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It was just, I'm not an expert on how we implement a load shed, but it was firm customers.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I have.
Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Good morning. Thanks for being here. I'm going to follow up on Chair Belzer's question regarding curtailment, and it may be a really obvious question, but I don't think I've heard anybody say the answer. Why are we having more curtailments this year than we've had in the past?
Curtailments are due to a few factors coming together. So like one of them is the makeup of your generating system, and that's not going to change very fast over the years, right? So that's basically a constant. Then you could have higher loads, meaning your customers are using more power in off-peak, even in mild periods, and that would help prevent curtailments because you'd have more load to put that power into. We haven't really seen a lot of that load growth lately, so that's probably not helping. So then if you add solar on top of that, new plants, you're actually increasing the chances that those plants will be on during those times. So more solar generators leads to more curtailments in general.
I expected half of that answer, and I didn't expect the other half. So the idea that customer load growth would play a role makes sense, but I hadn't thought of that. I've got a high-level question, and it's from looking at the changes from 2 years ago to now in terms of the VIC and the avoided cost rate. And my question to any of you is just describe in a succinct way why the changes, why there have been some increases, some decreases, and maybe start. Well, let's start with the VIC and going up by about 55%.
Sure. I think there are several key assumptions that have been updated in the last 2 years. Overall generation profiles have been updated. Fuel prices play a very significant role in this, as does overall demand. So all those things together are playing a pretty significant role in the change that we are seeing to the VIC. However, it's also significantly impacted by the higher level of solar penetration incorporated in this study, and thus the higher level of minimum operating reserve requirement needed to integrate it. I don't have the numbers in front of me from the last study, but when I conducted the study in support of Dominion's 2021 avoided cost filing, what we did find was that if we looked at tranches beyond what the commission set a VIC for at that time, we saw higher and higher VICs when we calculated it then too, because the more solar you add to the system, the higher the minimum operating reserve requirement is, which means operating the thermal fleet in a more and more inefficient manner, which drives up that VIC cost.
And then in terms of the capacity credit?
The capacity credit is very similar to the one we filed 2 years ago. The energy avoided costs are the one that's really a lot higher this time, and that's really driven by fuel cost and expectations of fuel cost. The fuel forecast, because the standard offer is a 10-year look ahead, what people are in those, when I say people, the folks that forecast gas prices have a high expectation of gas prices getting much higher than they are now. So that's the primary driver to the higher avoided energy cost.
think it was Witness Bell, in your opening statement may have talked about wear and tear, I think, on dispatchable resources, and that weren't designed for the kind of increases and decreases that were needed because of the impact of the amount of solar that's on the system. Can you talk about that in terms of where it plays a role in avoided cost?
So that wear and tear on units, it can be through just following load during the day, or it can be additional cycles on a unit, meaning taking it completely offline, maybe to cold steel, and then starting it back up more often than you would have otherwise. And you wouldn't see those in the avoided cost because those would increase their maintenance costs.
Okay. So we may hear more about that later.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that is it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, gentlemen.
You're welcome.
Mr. Neely, I want to follow up on Commissioner Williams's question about, she asked you about the why was there the change in the avoided capacity cost, and you gave a good answer on the avoided energy cost, but you didn't address the capacity cost. So could you tell us why that changed?
Yeah, it hasn't changed much. It's very similar to the price we filed last 2 years ago.
I understand you said it hasn't changed much, but there is a decrease. Is there a reason?
Well, the reason would be the things that go into the avoided capacity cost calculation are the expected load forecast and the cost of the turbines that we're using to model the base case and the change case. And so to the extent that the need changed or the cost of those resources changed, that would affect the calculation.
Okay, but you don't know which one changed.
Well, they both changed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So has the cost of the turbine that you're comparing to, is that decreased?
I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think it's really decreased. So it evidently is driven more by the load forecast. It could also be affected by the company's weighted average cost of capital. If our weighted average cost of capital was 8.5% 2 years ago, and now it's 7.5%, that would also affect that calculation.
Thank you. Appreciate that explanation. Commissioners, Commissioner
Madam
Cassidy.
Chair, one follow-up question. Thinking in terms of, I think where it talked about, PERPA or allowed 100 megawatt for any increase incremental or whatever. But thinking in terms of acquiring facilities or doing some type analysis, are there like standard for example, and I'm sorry, but I think water treatment, you think in terms of million gallon a day increments. Is there something like that on, gas, coal, or whatever? What increments can you plan for or can you acquire?
You want to take that?
I would say it depends on what you're talking about. Like, you referred to the 100 megawatts, and FERC says you can use 100 megawatts differential if your system is some big enough. They don't want you applying 100 megawatts to a small system. It needs to be a bigger system, right? So that's just something they pick to try to keep the avoided cost calculation reasonable and not pass too many charges to the customer, right? But when we do system planning, we don't really look at it as a number like what's the smallest number you would look at. It probably comes down to economics, like how small of a unit can you build. For thermal units, usually get economies of scale for a larger unit, but you're actually deciding based on your deficit to the reserve margin. So if it's only a little bit, you might not build during that year. And then you're going to build, and I say build loosely because we all know we're going to go through an RFP process to decide what to build. But you're going to build what's most economical to build. And if that's overbuilding a little bit for a couple years, you might do that to save costs overall. So I don't think it's a matter of how big, although the smallest turbines we really look at right now are about 50 megawatts. And that might be the short answer to your question.
Actually, all of that answer was very helpful. I appreciate it. That makes sense. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Commissioners, further questions for this panel?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Irvin?
Thank you. Gentlemen, I want to talk with you just a minute about the levelized cost of energy. Would you agree that besides tracking overall energy expenditures, there are several ways to accurately calculate and compare the energy costs for diverse consumption sources? Would you agree with that statement?
Is the question, is there different ways to calculate avoided energy cost?
Well, no, I'm focusing right now on the primary method used to calculate levelized cost of energy, or LCOE. You familiar with that term, aren't you?
I am familiar with that term, but that's not really a part of this hearing.
Well, bear with me if you will, just for a moment, because I think it ties back into some of the issues we've been talking about. Would you agree that the levelized cost of energy is a calculation used to assess the relative cost of energy generating technologies?
Yes.
Would you agree that this metric determines the lifetime cost for energy supply according to usage scale, location, and type of energy?
Well, respectfully, it's not a very good metric for valuing different resources because, a turbine can have a very high levelized cost of energy, but it may be the most economical resource that you would add to your system if what you need is a peaking resource. So I'm familiar with the levelized cost of energy. I've calculated it many times, but it's not a very good way to compare different generators.
But it does look at the lowest cost of generation, which is solar. Is that correct?
Solar is not the lowest cost generator. In fact, it's
in your South Carolina portfolio. Excuse me, wind would be the lowest, perhaps, but you don't have any wind generation in South Carolina system for Dominion Energy, do you?
Well, respectfully, Commissioner, actually nuclear power is the lowest cost, and then combined cycle gas generation is the next lowest cost. And so solar is one of the highest cost resources on our system when it's purchased through QFs.
Well, I want to challenge you on that statement, if you bear with me for a moment, because that's not what has been shown in studies that go back over the past decade. Solar and wind have always been and have been in the last decade in a steady decline in terms of levelized cost of energy across the board. And while fossil fuels have averaged a range between 0.05 kilowatt and 0.15 kilowatts in terms of their levelized cost of energy during the past decade, renewable energy like solar and wind are really cheaper, aren't they?
Not to the utility, no.
Well, haven't solar voltaic power sources seen the greatest change in cost? They dropped by 85% in the past decade. Would you agree with that?
Yes, they have dropped significantly.
Concentrating solar power, sometimes referred to as CSP, saw a 68% decrease in the same period. Would you agree with that?
Well, subject to check, I would agree with that, but we don't have any concentrated solar in this area. That's more of a Western resource.
Do you also agree that installation costs fell precipitously during the past decade for solar?
Yes, costs have fallen, and they have seemed to have leveled out where they are now. We haven't seen that kind of drop most recently.
So if you're looking solely at levelized cost of energy, you would still have to consider solar PV as a significant price decrease above other choices. Would you agree with that?
Well, what we pay for the avoided cost we pay for QF solar, it's not one of the cheapest resources on our system.
What would be the cheapest resource on your system at this time?
On an energy basis, it would be nuclear power, then followed by combined cycle gas power.
Well, if you're looking forward in terms of future development, would you agree that the great majority of investor-owned utilities have shied away from building large nuclear facilities due to cost overruns and uncertainty about their performance? Would you agree with that?
Yes, we don't, in our resource plan that we will present next month to you, we don't have any new solar in the reference plan. We have about 1,600 megawatts of new battery resources, 5,000 megawatts of new solar resources, and about 1,600 megawatts of new gas resources.
You may have misspoke. I don't think you have any new nuclear resources. Is that what you meant to say?
Yeah, Commissioner Irvin, I believe he did speak that first sentence. You said no solar instead of no nuclear.
Oh,
yeah.
No nuclear in the reference plan, yes.
Thank you. And the reason for that is what we've seen in our neighboring state of Georgia with cost overruns, the Vogtle plant, and of course our experience in South Carolina with what happened in the last failed attempt by SENG and its partners to build a nuclear facility. It's just not a viable alternative given cost overruns in the current state of the technology, is it?
We don't have any new nuclear in our current plan, but there is small modular reactors that are being considered all over the country, which may become a new technology that helps systems build reliable, non-emitting systems.
And the operative word there is may become, because right now there are no many modular solar units in operation in the United States by any investor-owned utility. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so what that leaves you with, and at least for South Carolina generation, it leaves you with gas peaker plants. It leaves you with coal-fired plants. It leaves you with existing nuclear facilities that may or may not be relicensed to extend their useful life. And finally, solar. Is that correct?
That's a good summary of the resources we have available to us.
And a small amount of hydroelectric. Would that be true?
Yes, we do have a significant amount of hydroelectric, including our pump storage system at Fairfield.
Right. Okay. Thank you for answering my questions. No further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Irvin. Commissioners, anything further? Mr. Anselmo, any redirect?
Chair Belzer, I do have some questions related to the stipulation, just to make sure that that the company is supporting it, since we didn't have summary testimony related to that. Mr. Bell, do you support the stipulation entered into between the company and ORS?
I do.
Mr. Neely, same question to you.
Yes, I do.
And Mr. David?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony this morning. You may stand down.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Anselmo?
Chair Belzer,
Mr. Burgess?
Dominion calls John E. Folsom Jr. and Jonathan T. Farley to the stand. That will be our next panel.
Thank you.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
All right, Mr. Folsom, I'm going to start with you. Would you please state your full name for the record?
John E. Folsom Jr. I go by Eddie.
And Mr. Folsom, by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Dominion Energy South Carolina as a senior market originator.
And did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direct supervision and pre-filed in this docket 7 pages of direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
And are there any changes or corrections required of your direct testimony?
No.
If I ask you all the questions contained in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, at this time, we would move into the record the pre-filed direct testimony of John E. Folsom Jr. as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Folsom's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. And Mr. Folsom, do you have any exhibits that are attached to your direct testimony?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or corrections required of your exhibits?
Yes, portions of the header and footer were incorrectly formatted due to redlining of the document. Specifically, the header in JEF1 at pages 56 through 69, the header in JEF2 at pages 57 through 71, and the footer in JEF3 at page 6. Those corrections are non-substantive and have been corrected in the versions provided to the court reporter.
Okay, and just so we're clear, Mr. Folsom, it's a header that requires correction of your exhibit. That is for JEF1, correct?
That is correct. There were no changes to the body of that exhibit.
Okay, and that header only needs to be corrected on pages 56 through 69, correct?
That is correct.
And that same change would also be at JEF2 for pages 57 to 71?
That is correct.
And then lastly, on JEF3, that same change, just with the header, is at page 6, correct?
That's right, but it was actually the footer on that document.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah, precisely. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Chair Belzer, we've provided the court reporter with an accurate collection of Mr. Folsom's exhibits with that corrected header there. And at this time, we would move into the record exhibits JEF 1, 2, and 3 as just corrected by Mr. Folsom.
And I believe that error in the header and the footer, it had a month and a year.
Yes, ma'am.
Effective, okay.
That is absolutely correct.
Right.
It was just a carryover from a prior year.
Mr. Folsom's exhibits, JEF 1 through 3, will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 3 and received into the evidence of this case.
Great. Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Folsom, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Would you please deliver that at this time?
Good morning, Chair Belzer and Commissioners. My direct testimony sponsors the company's proposed standard offer contract, form power purchase agreement, and notice of commitment to sell form. These documents are known as the company's Act Number 62 documents. The Commission approved the currently in effect Act Number 62 documents in Order Number 2022-329, issued in Docket Number 2021-88E. In this action, the company proposes keeping its standard offer contract, form power purchase agreement, and notice of commitment to sell form consistent with the existing Commission-approved forms. These documents comply with the requirements of PURPA and Act Number 62, provide necessary customer protections, and offer commercially reasonable terms to QS. The company requests the Commission reapprove the Act Number 62 documents in this proceeding. This completes the summary of my direct testimony.
All right, thank you, Mr. Folsom. Mr. Farley, I'm going to turn to you next. You'll pull that mic close to you and turn it on for me. Got to mash it hard. There you go. Would you please state your full name for the record?
Jonathan T. Farley.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Dominion Energy Services as a regulatory analyst for Dominion Energy South Carolina.
And have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your direct supervision and pre-filed in this docket direct testimony consisting of 7 pages?
Yes, I have.
And do you have any changes or corrections required of your pre-filed direct testimony?
I do not.
And if I ask you all the questions contained in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Chair Belzer, we would move into the record the pre-filed direct testimony of Jonathan T. Farley as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Farley's pre-filed direct testimony will be received into the record as if given from the stand.
Mr. Farley, have you also prepared any exhibits which have been attached to your testimony?
Yes, I have.
And do you have any changes or corrections required of your exhibits?
I do not.
Chair Belzer, we would move into the record as the next hearing composite exhibit, which is number 4, exhibits identified as JTF 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Mr. Farley's pre-filed exhibits with the notation JTF 1 through JTF 6 will be made a composite hearing exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit 4 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Farley, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Would you deliver that at this time?
Yes. Good morning, Chair Belzer, Commissioners. My testimony sets forth the company's request to approve its rate schedules. First, the company requests approval of its rate PR1 schedule. The only update reflected in rate PR1 is the company's current avoided costs calculated by company witness Neely. Second, the company seeks approval of its rate schedule setting forth rate PR avoided cost methodology that has been previously approved by the Commission, most recently in Commission Order number 2022-329. Third, the company requests approval of its rate PR standard offer. The standard offer includes the avoided cost rates proposed by the company in this proceeding for purchases of energy and capacity from small power producers up to 2 megawatts in size. The standard offer also sets forth terms and conditions and allows any small power producer with qualifying facilities to contract with the company to supply electricity at established rates without the need to negotiate an individual contract. Fourth, the company requests approval of rate PR form PPA. This schedule applies to qualifying power production facilities that have a facility rating greater than 2 megawatts and up to 80 megawatts, and therefore are not eligible for rate PR standard offer. Lastly, the company requests that the changes presented here today be made effective with the first billing cycle of the month following the date of the Commission's order in this proceeding. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Farley. Gentlemen, before I turn you over, I have one final question for you, Mr. Folsom. Mr. Folsom, do you support the stipulation entered into between the company and ORS?
Yes, I do.
And Mr. Farley, do you support the stipulation that's been entered into between the company and ORS?
Yes, I do.
And Mr. Farley, on behalf of the company, is DESC specifically asking this commission to approve the stipulation?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Farley. Chair Belzer, these two gentlemen are available for cross-examination by counsel for CCL and SACE, as well as examination by the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, any questions?
No questions.
Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions.
Commissioners? Commissioner Caston?
I actually have only one question, and I think Mr. Bell threw you under the bus, Mr. Folsom, if you have the answer. In his testimony, where it says, depending on the size of the plant, PURPA exempts QFs from most of the Federal Power Act, Public Utility Holding Company Act 2005. Additionally, PURPA exempts QFs from certain state laws and regulations respecting rates as well as financial and organizational aspects of utilities. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, first of all, let me be honest with you, or it might be a good thing for you. I left the room for a moment ago, a short while, and the first thing I heard when I walked back in the room was Witness Bell saying, "I'll defer that issue to Witness Folsom." So you actually caught me completely cold with that question rather than me having a moment to think about it. And the next thing I'll ask is, would you mind repeating it? I was having a hard time hearing you.
I just kind of, if you could elaborate on what this is, where PURPA exempts QFs from certain state laws and regulations respecting rates as well as financial and organizational aspects of utilities. If you had more specificity.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind there is just the fact that PURPA does impose a must-purchase obligation on utilities if a generating facility meets the qualifications of PURPA to be a qualifying facility. So by virtue of us having to buy the output of those facilities, we can't make the same kinds of decisions that we would make otherwise based on economics, reliability, things of that nature. And then I think what it also does is it imposes on state commissions the obligation to deal with the cost recovery associated with those must-purchase obligations. And so, you know, off the top of my head, kind of swinging from the hip here, that's pretty much what I think of relative to what that would refer to. There may be other issues that I'm not thinking of right now, but that's what comes to mind for me.
Well, with all due respect to Mr. Bell, you offered more than he did.
Well, that's probably the first time that's ever happened, so that's good. I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir. No more questions.
Commissioners, questions for this panel? Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Farley, your testimony, your summary ended with a note that I believe that you would ask that we would implement this the beginning of the following month, that you all would be able to implement it the beginning of the following month after we issue an order on this. Is that accurate? Was that part of your?
Yes, that's correct.
And is that, talk to me about that timing. Is that based on when we updated avoided cost and the forms 2 years ago? Is it just appropriate that it go into effect the next month?
It's a matter of timing. The subsequent month at the beginning would be ideal to make sure that it was in place for all customers.
Have the forms been in, is there any requirement that we, I think I'm just asking because I don't want to start this any sooner than the law requires that we start it. Is there any, I'm just trying to understand more about the requirement of how long the prior rates stay in effect. Can you add anything to that?
Yes, it's my understanding that once this commission issues an order, then we will essentially have a clean split from the previous rates and then implementing the new rates. So as far as they're having an effective date saying that thou shalt have these to a specific date, I am unaware of that. I know that it's just upon order from the commission.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Commissioners, anything further for these witnesses? Hearing none, Mr. Burgess, any redirect?
No, ma'am, no redirect, and we would ask these witnesses to be excused.
Gentlemen, y'all may stand down.
I'm sorry, let me be clear. We'll just stand down. We're not going anywhere.
Excused is at his peril, so, but you may stand down. Thank you very much for your testimony this morning.
Chair Belzer, that concludes the company's case in chief and rebuttal.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. We've been going about an hour and a half. Why don't we take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back in ORS. You have one witness, is that correct? Two witnesses, I'm sorry. Two witnesses. And we'll hear from your witnesses when we come back. Thank you very much. We are in recess for 15 minutes until 11:45. Thank you. Good morning and welcome back as we continue in the hearing before the Public Service Commission in docket number 2023-15-E. This docket involves the 2023 avoided cost proceeding of Dominion Energy South Carolina, Inc. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Joining us virtually is Commissioner Irvin. Present in the hearing room, Commissioner Justin Williams, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. We've concluded with Dominion's case. Recognize the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. ORS calls as its first witness O'Neill O. Morgan.
Mr. Morgan, please come forward.
So raise your right hand, please. Do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Mr. Morgan, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and turn that microphone on if you would and adjust it for you. Thank you, sir. Mr. Huber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Morgan.
Good afternoon.
Will you please state your full name and occupation?
My name is O'Neill Morgan, occupation senior engineer at ORS.
And are you the same O'Neill O. Morgan who pre-filed 7 pages of direct testimony in this case on June 7th, 2023?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
If I asked you the same questions today as those posed in your pre-filed testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, ORS asked that the pre-filed direct testimony of O'Neill Morgan be entered into the record of the case as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Morgan's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, did you prepare a brief summary of your testimony?
Yes, I did.
Would you please present that summary?
Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. The purpose of my direct testimony is to set forth the results of ORS's examination of Dominion Energy South Carolina's 2023 avoided cost application for compliance with certain portions of South Carolina Code Annotation 584120. Subsequent to filing my direct testimony, a stipulation was entered into between the company and ORS in this proceeding. The stipulation is offered as a fair, reasonable, and full resolution of the issues in this proceeding. Further, ORS believes that the stipulation is in the public interest of South Carolina and respectfully requests that the Commission approve the stipulation as presented. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Madam Chair, Mr. Morgan is now available for questions from the parties in the Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. Any questions?
No questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon. Dominion Energy. Thank you. Commissioners, questions for Mr. Morgan? Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belser. Good morning, Mr. Morgan. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you.
I would like to hear a little bit from you about the elements of the stipulation that we should all have on our mind for the next avoided cost hearing. So as I read the stipulation, there are a number of elements where you all agreed that there would be further study. And so I'd just like for you to remind me of what those are and tell me more about them.
Okay. We have further discussion that we need to have between us and the company to better align the TOP periods used for the avoided energy and the discussion as it relates to using the marginal cost pricing as opposed to the company's calculated avoided costs. On the avoided capacity, there needs to be further discussion on the use of net cone for evaluation of the CT capacity value and an assignment of zero capacity value for interim years. Are you going to ask a question? I see you.
I should have asked you as you were talking, but I didn't really want to interrupt. I missed a word when you were talking about avoided capacity and the use of net something.
Net cone for evaluation of CT capacity value. And with the VIC, the discussion on using the levelization NPV calculation and solar curtailment as operating reserves.
Are you able to add any more background regarding those items?
I would, but I would pass those on to our expert witness, Ming, who will provide more details as it relates to those subjects.
Thank you. I appreciate the answers. No further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners, questions for Mr. Morgan? Good morning, Mr. Morgan.
Good morning.
I understand that the stipulation sets forth certain issues that Dominion and ORS have agreed to discuss. Does that stipulation limit ORS and Dominion from adding other issues to that list, should they arise?
I do not believe so.
Okay. So we heard some testimony from Dominion that they had proposed for two years. I can't remember the issue, and it had been rejected, so they didn't propose it this time. There's nothing preventing y'all
So you're
from
referring to a specific rate for solar?
Yes. There's nothing to prohibit y'all from adding that to the list.
No.
Okay. Now, there are multiple methodologies for determining avoided cost. Is that correct?
Yes. To my knowledge, there may be at least 5 different methodologies.
And there's strengths and weaknesses for each one. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And if the discussion leads into whether to continue to use the same methodology or look at some of the others, there's nothing to prohibit that, is there?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Just curious here. Thank you very much.
Thank
That's
you.
all I have. Commissioners, any further questions for Mr. Morgan? Hearing none, Mr. Morgan, any redirect?
No, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, you may stand down. Thank you for your testimony this morning.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, ORS next calls Mr. Zachary Ming, and Chad Torrey will be presenting Mr. Ming's testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. And I believe Mr. Ming is virtual. Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair.
There he is. Good morning, Mr. Ming.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Mr. Torrey, I'll let you call him, and then I'll swear him in.
All right. Mr. Ming, can you see and hear us well?
Yes.
Okay. Madam Chair's going to swear you in, okay?
Mr. Ming, would you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Ming. I think we're still morning by just a few minutes. Would you please state your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Zachary Ming.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I am employed by a consulting firm, Energy and Environmental Economics, or E3, and I'm a director at E3, and we have been retained by ORS in this proceeding.
And Mr. Ming, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 41 pages of direct testimony pre-filed in this proceeding on June 7th, 2023?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
I do not.
And if I ask you today the same questions that were posed within the pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, ORS would move that the pre-filed direct testimony of Zachary Ming be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Ming's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if testified to from the stand.
Mr. Ming, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared one exhibit that was attached to your pre-filed direct testimony and marked as Exhibit ZM1?
Yes.
And do you have any changes to that exhibit?
I do not.
Madam Chair, ORS would ask that Exhibit ZM1 attached to Mr. Ming's direct testimony be entered into the record as the next hearing exhibit.
Mr. Ming's Exhibit ZM1 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 5 and received into the evidence of this case.
Mr. Ming, did you also prepare cause to be prepared 23 pages of surrebuttal testimony pre-filed in this proceeding on July 17th, 2023?
Yes, I did.
And do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed surrebuttal testimony?
No, I do not.
If I ask you the same questions today that were posed within the pre-filed surrebuttal testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, ORS would ask that Mr. Ming's pre-filed surrebuttal testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Ming's surrebuttal testimony will be received into the record as if given orally from the stand.
And Mr. Ming, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared one exhibit that was attached to your pre-filed surrebuttal testimony and marked as surrebuttal exhibit ZM1?
Yes.
Do you have any changes to that exhibit?
I do not.
And Mr. Ming, did surrebuttal exhibit ZM1 contain information that was designated as confidential by the company?
Yes, it did.
And did you cause to be pre-filed a redacted version of surrebuttal exhibit ZM1?
Yes.
Madam Chair, ORS moves that the redacted version of surrebuttal exhibit ZM1 attached to Mr. Ming's surrebuttal testimony be entered into the record as the next hearing exhibit. ORS further moves that the confidential version of surrebuttal exhibit ZM1 be entered into the record but remain under seal.
Mr. Ming's surrebuttal exhibit ZM1 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit 6 and received into the evidence of this case. The confidential version of ZM1, surrebuttal ZM1, will maintain confidential designation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, in light of the stipulation, Mr. Ming will not be presenting a summary of his testimony this morning, but he is absolutely available for questions from the parties and the commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Torrey. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
No questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon. Dominion Energy. Thank you, Mr. Anselmo. Commissioners, questions for Mr. Ming? Commissioner Justin Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Ming. I can't remember where you calling in from. Where are you calling in from, sir?
I'm in San Francisco.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Ming. Out there in San Francisco. Just have a couple of questions for you. I understand that your position on the VIC initially was different than the utilities position. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Could you explain those differences?
Yes, there were two primary differences, and both of the critiques that I had with the VIC actually would cause the VIC to change in different directions. So the methodological difference that I raised, or methodological issue that I raised with the VIC, was that it was overestimating the quantity of operating reserves that solar is incrementally causing on the system on high solar days. That's one of the critiques. And then the other critique is that I believe the company could improve its methodology by allowing its own solar resources, not QF Solar, but its own solar resources to provide operating reserves, just as they use their own resources to provide operating reserves today. And to the extent that that could be done at a lower cost than committing traditional dispatchable operating reserves, then that would decrease the cost of integrating solar onto the system and decrease the VIC. So both of those changes would serve to decrease the VIC. There was another recommendation that I raised on the mathematical levelization calculation approach that would serve to increase the VIC. So those two changes were counteracting each other somewhat.
Understood. And in the face of those differences, and understanding that you're supporting the settlement, what caused you to support the settlement, or the stipulation, excuse me?
Well, I believe that the settlement does stipulate that the companies and ORS will work together to continue to improve the methodology in the future. So I recognize that the study that the company has put forward, as they have said, is the only study that has been completed on the VIC topic. So I've raised several methodological critiques for improvement. I recognize that those will take some time to incorporate into the study, and so the fact that the company has stated that they will work with ORS going forward, I think is an improvement.
Okay. Thank you very much. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Caston is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess good morning to you and good afternoon to us, Mr. Mean.
Yes. Good afternoon.
The Plexos model, how it models the marginal cost, is it based on one more megawatt or something smaller than that?
Yes, that's a good question that I addressed in my rebuttal testimony, and I believe it's my position that the company, Dominion, is mischaracterizing precisely what marginal cost represents. And this is also an issue that has come up in prior proceedings that my colleague at E3, who was ORS's witness in prior proceedings, raised. The precise definition of marginal cost is not one more megawatt or one less megawatt. It's the change in cost at a given point in time. So it really refers to an infinitesimal change that is neither one more or one less. It's just the slope of the total cost function for a particular quantity. So marginal cost is neither incremental nor decremental. It's just the slope of the line representing an infinitesimally small quantity.
Okay. And this is probably just due to my ignorance, but if ultimately you've got to come up with a number, and you're looking at infinitesimal point on a line, how do you do that? Do you pick a place on that line, draw it down, and put a number there, or how is that determined?
That's exactly what you do. You can look at the slope of the line, and that's theoretically the definition of marginal cost. But for Plexos, what Plexos is doing is it's looking at, for any given hour of the year, how would the cost change if the quantity of production were different? So it's also its algorithm is not adding 1 megawatt or adding a particular quantity of a megawatt. It's just looking at the slope. It's looking at how its total cost would change. And that refers equally to an incremental or a decremental, very small quantity.
Okay. So, and I guess this ties into that, you know, your recommendation on marginal cost. You're saying that the DRR method, the company should not use 100 megawatts as the difference, but a small amount of megawatts. And I guess because of what you just said, in essence, is that correct?
That's correct. I believe the 100 megawatts is distorting, the DRR method is intended to, let me back up. The 100 megawatts is that FERC allows for is intended to be a marginal quantity. The reason that they cap that quantity at 100 megawatts is because that is, for large systems, 100 megawatts is a fairly small quantity relative to the size of the system. You know, Dominion's peak load is over 2,000 megawatts. So 100 megawatts is a small fraction of that. The issue is that even that large of a quantity is distorting the results of their marginal cost and is yielding different results than if they were to just use the marginal cost value. In certain places, or historically, when we didn't have the computing models that are available to us today, using a 100 megawatt value may have been the best approximation that a system could calculate. But today, with the computing models available, we do have direct actual marginal cost values. And given that marginal cost is the best approximation of avoided cost, as FERC has said, that is what should be used to produce the most accurate, best representation of the company's avoided cost.
I'd like to tell you that I totally followed all that, but I did not. Let me ask you this. If it's possible to answer this, if not 100 megawatt, what should it be?
It should be marginal cost, which is an infinitesimally small quantity. Any quantity that deviates from marginal cost is going to distort the answer in some way.
Okay, that's actually what I thought you were saying. I guess I just can't figure out how I would still do that, but I understand that. Thank you. So when are reserves typically needed?
Operating reserves?
Yes. Yes, sir.
They're needed in every hour of the day.
I believe that's it, Mr. Ming. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioners, Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Good morning, Mr. Ming.
Good morning.
Good morning. You talked about the elements in the stipulation taking time to evaluate and to come to new understandings about. Do you have any recommendations for how soon those conversations happen? knowing that we'll be looking at these questions in another 2 years?
I would say as soon as the company starts to begin its process for the next phase of analysis, and yeah, I would say conversations could begin as soon as possible.
As soon as possible, but once the company begins the avoided cost preparations. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think it's.
Or does it need
the
to happen right
conversation-
away
right.
while the conversation, while the challenges are fresh?
I think it would be beneficial to have the conversation sooner rather than later, but certainly no later than the company begins its process of starting the next analysis.
Thank you. No further questions.
Commissioners?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Irvin?
Good morning, sir. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Just for the record, could you briefly give us your professional background and experience as it relates to avoided cost?
Yes, I have conducted avoided cost studies in multiple states across the country in my position at E3, including in California, Oregon, Nevada, New York, and South Carolina. And generally, I focus on at E3 the topic of the economics of electricity in a variety of contexts. In addition to addition to my work at E3, I teach a course at Stanford University titled Electricity Economics. That one of the topics that we cover is avoided cost and rate design.
What is your educational background?
I have a bachelor's of science from Stanford and a master's of science from Stanford.
How many avoided cost proceedings have you provided testimony in your professional career?
As far as testifying before a utility commission, I have done that in Oregon related to capacity avoided costs. The other avoided cost studies that I have led or participated in I have not provided testimony before a commission, but those have been submitted as part of avoided cost or cost effectiveness proceedings.
You're familiar with the fact that Dominion Energy South Carolina uses Plexus as the model for computing avoided costs?
Yes, I am.
What is your opinion about the Plexus model? Any shortcomings? Any shortcomings or advantages?
No, I think the Plexus model is one of the gold standard models in the industry.
Okay. What recommendations do you have to improve the avoided cost process in South Carolina as it relates to regulated electrical investor-owned utilities?
My direct testimony raises several issues, recommendations for improvement, all of them towards the end goal of improving the accuracy of the avoided costs that better represent the company's actual avoided costs. So the primary areas of recommendation are to use marginal cost as opposed to a 100 megawatt change case to calculate avoided costs. I have recommendations to change the time periods with which the company groups hours together for calculating avoided cost compensation. I have recommendations on improving the capacity avoided costs to include a small but non-zero value in years before the company has an identified capacity need. And then for the years in which the company does have a capacity need, I actually recommend to reduce the capacity value slightly from the gross cost of new entry to the net cost of new entry to account for the energy benefits that a peaking resource would provide. And then I also have recommendations for improving the VIC charge that I previously stated.
Is it your understanding that your recommendations are going to be implemented by the parties as they move forward and trying to improve our avoided costs processes and procedures in South Carolina?
It is my understanding that the company will work with ORS to try to incorporate changes or try to come to a better understanding than happened in this proceeding, or try to incorporate the recommendations that were not incorporated in this proceeding. So I don't exactly know where that will end up, but there has been a commitment to work together to incorporate those recommendations into the next proceeding.
Do you believe that if your recommendations that you just listed were incorporated in the South Carolina avoided cost proceedings, that would be in the public interest?
I believe that if the recommendations were incorporated, it would improve the accuracy of the avoided costs. I do recognize that there are multiple factors at play in determining avoided costs. For example, the commission is striving to balance the most accurate price signal with something that's understandable to the QFs, something that follows prior precedent, something that is stable over time. There are multiple factors at play, and I recognize that those need to be considered, which is the role of the commission. But the recommendations that I have put forward serve to improve the accuracy of the avoided costs.
Would that in turn serve the public interest?
It would, to improve the accuracy, yes.
Would it also serve the best interests of the utilities customers?
Yes, it would.
Now, you mentioned earlier in your testimony that the utility, Dominion Energy South Carolina, is not utilizing its own solar resources in the most optimal way. Would you explain why you found that to be true?
This is a topic that is being actively studied in the industry right now. From a fundamental perspective, as the VIC charge is trying to quantify, it's trying to quantify the cost of holding operating reserves that are needed to ramp up if there's something unexpected on the system, like a cloud that goes over a solar facility and causes the output to drop. Something else has to immediately be available to ramp up to fill that gap. What the company does today is they hold dispatchable resources, primarily natural gas resources, that are not fully ramped up, that are available to ramp up if needed to fill in for those types of issues. Alternatively, what the company could do, and this is something that has been studied, I cited sources in my testimony showing studies that have quantified the ability to do this. The company could ramp down solar resources or pre-curtail solar resources. And what that does is, and these would be its own solar resources, what that does is if a cloud goes over a QF resource, then the company can uncurtail its own solar resources, which effectively ramp those resources up just in this exact same way that they would ramp up a natural gas resource to serve, to provide operating reserves for the unexpected cloud that went over a solar facility. So that is an option. That's not to say that in all cases it's more economic to curtail solar instead of holding natural gas resources. But on some days where the system is very constrained or doesn't have a lot of extra natural gas capacity, it might be cheaper and or more economic to use solar as an operating reserve as opposed to natural gas. And in looking at the outputs of the company's VIC study, there are some days where the cost of traditional natural gas operating reserves that they're calculating is extremely high, which means that it likely would be more economic to use solar as operating reserves on those days as opposed to natural gas capacity.
And in your study of these issues around the country, in fact, there are recent examples where solar has essentially bailed out peaker gas plants or coal-fired plants that failed during the Winter Storm Elliott. Is that true? Didn't solar basically bail out the Texas system, ERCOT system, when they had failures with their gas peaker plants and coal-fired plants?
I think that I would hesitate to dive into those issues without more specifics.
I understand.
I do recognize.
Let me ask it this way. Is it still the case that when you look at the levelized cost of solar, it's still, with the exception of wind, which we don't have in South Carolina as a generating resource, isn't solar the cheapest cost resource, generation source available today?
Commissioner, respectfully, I just wanted to keep us on point here, where this is avoided cost. The levelized cost of energy can, while some related, is really not an apples to apples comparison.
If you'd answer the question, please.
So I do work fairly significantly in resource planning that puts together portfolios of resources. I would say that at E3 and on all of the studies that we do, we generally don't think about there being a cheapest resource. We think about there being a cheapest portfolio of resources, and the cheapest portfolio of resources needs a diverse set of resources, and they all work together. They serve different purposes. So we don't look at the LCOE of a resource and say that's the cheapest. We look at the cheapest portfolio, which needs multiple types of resources because they all serve different purposes.
That's certainly a fair answer, but in terms of if you're just trying to isolate lowest cost, if that's the sole factor that you're considering in a portfolio, diverse portfolio, that would be a consideration, would it not?
Yes, we look at the lowest cost portfolio. Yes.
And since the sun is going to be with us for a while, and since solar doesn't have to rely on the increased cost of gas or coal that can spike as a commodity, to have a terrible impact on ratepayers unexpectedly when the investor-owned utility is not using a hedging program. Would that further indicate a look for solar to be a part of a diversified portfolio for the investor-owned utility?
In most utilities across the United States, solar is a part of the future portfolio plans, and that is also the case for Dominion. Solar is a significantly growing portion of their planned portfolio.
Thanks, sir. No further questions.
Thank you.
Commissioner Caston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a follow-up question. I want to make sure I understand, Mr. Ming, in talking about the reserves. If I understood you to say that utility typically I guess, keeps a gas-fired plant running at a lower rate. So if that cloud passes over or there's some instantaneous drop-off of the solar, it has the ability to ramp up. Is that, in essence, what you said, or how that kind of works?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And I think in your testimony and what you were responding to then, I think I followed it, was using that the utility could ramp up. I don't think he said down, but I guess if you could ramp up, you could ramp down. Ramp up or down solar sources to compensate for the solar sources that were, dropping down some. Is that what you said?
Can you repeat that one more time, please?
It was confusing to me too. Were you talking about, instead of using coal-fired plants to ramp up when the cloud comes over, that the utility could ramp up other solar sources to compensate for that? Is that what you said?
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
So that would have to occur if you had a portion of solar sources that weren't on the clouds, and this was just an isolated cloud, correct?
That's correct. Well, it doesn't necessarily matter as much whether they're under clouds or not. It matters that you have to pre-curtail some of the solar. So you have to ramp down the solar below its maximum capability, whether it's sunny or partially cloudy. Even under clouds, solar's producing something. So if you ramp down the solar below what it's maximally capable of producing at any point in time, then you create the ability to undo that and ramp it back up. That ramping it back up is the exact same service that a natural gas generator provides that's operating below its maximum capability.
Okay. But if I understood it correctly, that the majority of the megawatts of solar are QFs, and the utility has no control over those as far as ramping up or down. Is that correct?
Well, the utility does have thousands of megawatts of planned non-QF solar that will be coming online over the coming years. And the VIC calculation that the company was performing was over a 10-year period going through 2032. So we believe there's more than enough utility-controlled solar that's non-QF solar to provide the necessary operating reserves to integrate the QF resources.
Okay, so what I think I'm hearing is that if the utility can control them, that is a higher probability of something that could work rather than them not being able to control them. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. The utility does need to be able to control solar for this to work. And there are many thousands of megawatts that are coming online that are non-QF solar that the company has the ability to control.
Okay. If that's good enough. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ming.
Good morning, Mr. Ming. I just had a couple of questions. Mr. Ming, you raised an issue about how the company treated the daylight savings time in its methodology. You raised that, I believe, in your direct, and I think Mr. Neely addressed that in his rebuttal and said that the company that was embedded in the methodology. Did that satisfy your concern over that daylight savings time issue?
It did satisfy my concern, and I would recommend that going forward in future proceedings the company labels their data with what the timestamp is. So they should label each hour as, is this Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time or Eastern Prevailing Time? And then that would make it obvious from the application how daylight savings has been treated.
Okay. And then you had several recommendations, and I noted in the stipulation that Dominion has agreed to work with study to minimize the differences between the calculation of avoided energy costs, the company's calculation of avoided energy cost, and ORS's calculation. That's one of the areas that the company and ORS are going to work together, and that was one of your recommendations. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And then also that the company and ORS are agreeing to work on the time of production periods, and that was another one of your recommendations, correct?
Correct, yes.
And then finally, you had a concern about the avoided capacity rate, and in the stipulation, I believe that I'm not sure that one was agreed to by the company. But can you tell me your you've discussed it a little bit, but succinctly tell me the issue you had with the avoided capacity rate?
Yes, very succinctly, there was two issues that I raised, and again, these issues counteract each other somewhat. But in the years before the company has an identified capacity need, I recommend that they assign a small but non-zero value to those years for capacity. Right now, the company is assigning a 0 value to capacity in those years. And then, so that would increase the capacity price, my recommendation. And then in the years where the company does have an identified capacity need, I recommend that they reduce the capacity value from the gross cost of capacity to the net cost of capacity. So that recommendation would decrease the capacity rate.
Okay. And I may have missed it. I didn't see that in the stipulation, but I also saw that the company and ORS are agreeing to look at the VIC and ensure that the net present value calculation embedded in the VIC is accurate. Was that one of your recommendations as well?
Yes.
Okay. Were there any other recommendations that were not addressed that you had?
There were not.
Okay. Mr. Ming, that's all I have. Commissioners, anything further for this witness? Mr. Torrey?
Nothing further, Madam Chair.
No redirect? Mr. Ming, thank you for your testimony today. We appreciate you joining us from San Francisco. You might be in a better weather situation there than we are here in the end of July, but hope you have a good day and you may stand down.
Okay.
Thank you,
you
sir.
for having me. Thank you.
Mr. Torrey, anything else? Or Mr. Huber?
That's all. ORS is complete with its case.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else, anything from any party before we close this proceeding? Or close today's proceeding? Mr. Huber, you look like you want to say something.
No, Madam Chair, I think you covered. I was just about to mention that there's still, I guess, the London economics portion of this, but
yes,
nothing further.
Coming up in October, so we will close today's portion of this proceeding, and I think we will probably be seeing each other in October. So if there's nothing else, last call, any party. Well, we will close today's portion, but recess until the next proceeding, and thank you all, and hope you have a good afternoon, and we are adjourned from today. I'm not sure if I should say adjourned or recessed, but anyway, we're closing today's portion. Thank you.